159. Let's get to the Ghostbusters reboot from 2016, also known as Ghostbusters Answer the Call, which is directed by Paul Feig, co-written by Feig as well, but also Katie Dippold, who wrote The Heat for Paul Feig, as well as some episodes of Parks and Rec, Haunted Mansion, the reboot film. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, Leslie Jones, Zach Woods, Ed Begley Jr., Charles Dance. Pretty decent cast, Chris Hemsworth. And the synopsis is, following a ghost invasion of Manhattan, paranormal enthusiasts Aaron Gilbert and Abby Yates, nuclear engineer Jillian Holtzman, and subway worker Patty Tolan band together to stop the otherworldly threat. So I think firstly, getting out there, this is my favorite of the five besides the original, which I know is probably a hot take. I know some people hate this movie for some reason in comparison to the others. This is my favorite by far of the sequels and reboots. And so getting right into it, I know there was the whole ridiculous controversy of when this one was announced and they, God forbid, had women in the lead roles. People, as they still continue to do, make such a fuss over there being a reboot, spin-off, whatever, and women being the lead instead of men. Oh my God, how terrible. And so that immediately had review bombing and all this stuff, and it probably was one of the causes of the movie flopping. But of course, the other two after this haven't really done very well either, so I don't think it was really that. But when that was going on, it was completely ridiculous. I, of course, did not care at all, considering everyone in this movie I loved, still love. I loved Paul Feig. I think The Heat, Spy, Bridesmaids is still probably his best movie so far, but this one would be second on the list, I think. And so I went into this one not really being a big Ghostbusters fan at that point in time and didn't know really what to expect. And even when I first saw it, I enjoyed it a lot more than other people seem to. I still, please comment if you're on YouTube or on Bandcamp or wherever, and let me know why this movie doesn't work in comparison to the others, if that's how you feel. But especially having watched all five of these together, as I did just recently for this show, to me, of the four new films, this is the only one that actually captures the spirit and comedic nature of the original. Because Ghostbusters 2, as I already talked about, pretty dry. I mean, it does have the essence of the first one, but of the latter two films, Afterlife and Frozen Empire, which we'll get to, and I like those movies, don't get me wrong, and I like that they are trying something different tonally, but this, to me, feels like an actual comedy. The writing is comedic, the performances are comedic, whereas I feel like the latter two films are almost too serious. And I enjoy spending time in this world. I wish that there had been more. I don't know why, since this one didn't do well, it didn't get a sequel, when then Afterlife didn't do very well either, and it got Frozen Empire and possibly another one, so I don't get that. But I would happily, so much rather have seen Ghostbusters 2 of this reboot than of Afterlife. And I think that this one, I by far had the most fun with this one. And I watched the extended cut, which there's not a huge difference between the theatrical and the extended, but the characters, I think all lead four performances are iconic. I love everyone in this movie. It's not perfect. It's not a masterpiece, but like, I was never bored. I was laughing consistently. And once again, it didn't feel like it was trying too hard to ground this in some sort of kind of Stranger Things-esque world or tone. And even talking about not the performances, visually, the movie looks awesome. I think it looks, in terms of special effects, looks way more colorful and interesting and cool than anything in Afterlife or Frozen Empire or in 2. I think especially, this is probably the only third act of the five films that I enjoy the most, or that I actually enjoy, and I'm not wanting it to be over. Like everything, jumping all the way to the end here, the fight in New York City with the greens and the blues, the possessed Chris Hemsworth acting like Peter Pan, the Oogie Boogie Man-esque ghosts walking through the city, the fog and smoke through Times Square. I think this movie, like, I could not believe how well this movie held up visually. I was worried, but there's also the pinstripe ghosts, like look of the ghosts, the old-fashioned Victorian dresses that they wear. Everything about this movie visually is top notch, especially in comparison to the others. And so that was something that had me hooked. But the four main women, they work together so well. The writing, and it helps that Katie Dippold has written a lot of comedy with what I was just saying earlier, as opposed to the writers of Afterlife and Frozen Empire, which is Jason Reitman and Gil Keenan, who, I mean, they have some comedy to their name, but not a lot, whereas Katie Dippold is a true comedy writer, and you see that in the writing. But how they create that world, how they create the right atmosphere where I'm feeling like, all right, I'm in a new Ghostbusters movie. I'm not in a Ghostbusters imitation or a knockoff. I feel like, all right, this could be the new series of Ghostbusters films that I would absolutely would be okay spending more time in. Like, it's long. I will say that's really one of the only issues I have with the movie is it does feel too long. I think all these movies should be right around the hour 45-minute mark total. And this one is, with the extended cut, like 2:10, maybe 2:15. So I do agree. There are points where I'm like, oh, geez, this is still going. And like, we still have a little ways to go. But at the same time, I'm not upset that I'm spending time with Kate McKinnon. And whereas in the latter sequels, or the narrative sequels in terms of the original, I get kind of bored spending time with those characters. Like, I don't really know, couldn't tell you anything about people like Paul Rudd, Carrie Coon. Like, there's so little impact. Even though I don't mind spending time with them, I still like those actors. There's really so little development to who they are as people and how much fun I have with them in comparison to this one. And, you know, if I just watched this one by itself, or I'd watch those by itself, maybe I wouldn't be thinking about it as much. But I was like, all right, I want to do all 5 of these together. Let's really compare them side by side. And I'm glad I did, because besides the stupid hate that it got for having women in the lead role to reboot it, I don't really see why this movie gets trashed so bad. Like, people say, oh, this is horrible. Like, I cannot believe how bad it was. Like, this is one of the worst comedies of recent memory. Like, I don't get it. Like, this movie is so much funnier for a variety of reasons. It has so much more of a palpable, inviting, welcoming, enjoyable atmosphere than a lot of other action comedies do, that I really genuinely, I'm not trying to be like contrarian or just make noise. I actually am really kind of confused. Even, again, like when I first saw, I'm like, why are people hating this so much? And maybe that's because I have a low level for comedy. I don't know. Or I like Katie Dippold's and Paul Feig's previous works, but I think this movie is genuinely very, very solid. And it really made me feel so much better. Really gave me a mood boost. Talking about specific scenes, the opening at the mansion, fantastic, where there's Zach Woods trying to play a joke on these customers for like a tour, like a ghost tour. And then the look of that ghost, the blue, amazing. So good. And then Kristen Wiig's character trying to get tenure, and then her reuniting with Melissa McCarthy, who they have had this falling out, and Chris Hemsworth, and I just saw him in Furiosa. He's amazing in that. He really has grown so much as an actor, and he has such good versatility at this point. Like, he's not like just a pretty face. He actually is a very good actor, dramatically and comedically, but he is so funny in this. The whole thing where he doesn't have glasses or lenses to his glasses, and he says, all right, I'm not going to listen, and he puts his fingers through his glasses. And the writing for him is very, very good too. If you really pay attention to it, it's so clever. Just a very subtle, dry confusions that he has about normal, everyday social gatherings, or the name of his cat. I love his character, and that's such a good and very refreshingly enjoyable side character. But Kate McKinnon, I love her in everything. She's amazing, one of the funniest people alive. I think she's incredible in SNL, and I love seeing her in movies and in TV. And I think the look of her character, and possibly some people get bored of this, I think every time it cuts to her and she's making some ridiculous face, or if you pay attention to her in the background, hysterical. Leslie Jones and Melissa McCarthy, very good as well. I think they're more the typical version of themselves. Not to say that's bad, but I think they're, if I had to point out the least impactful performances, it would probably be them. I think it would be Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, and Chris Hemsworth would be the winners for me performance wise, but they're still very good. The metal show, the rock show, where the ghost possesses the mannequin, so good. There's also the scene towards the end in the big climactic sequence where Slimer comes back and he is driving the car, or driving the Ecto-1. Love that. And the look of the Ecto-1, great. A few one-off funny scenes for me is when Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig recreate their high school or middle school science project presentation. The scene in the alleyway where Melissa McCarthy tries out the blaster and she flies all over the place, and where Melissa McCarthy is getting upset over the wonton soup towards the beginning where she first reunites with Kristen Wiig. Oh, and also at the rock show, I didn't mention where the flying ghost gets on top of Leslie Jones and she's walking through and she's like, I'm gonna head out, I'm tired. Or where Kristen Wiig is oogling Chris Hemsworth when they first interview him, and the alternatives to the Ghostbuster icon with like the big boobs, or where he just puts up the 7-Eleven logo. Perfect. The look of when Melissa McCarthy is about to get possessed or is getting possessed, and she has the consistently green slime oozing out of her nose and her ears, like that looks really good and it looks completely believable. I don't know if that was actually effects or if that was some sort of practical thing, but it looks awesome. The scene towards the end where Chris Hemsworth is in Times Square, or the possessed version of him is, and he makes the National Guard and policemen dance and then freeze in place. I mean, I feel like I could talk about this movie all day, and there's not a single scene really that I dislike, which is kind of rare for a movie like this. Like, it is so showy and big budget with a lot of big performances and actors. I'm never really offended by anything. I'd say really one of the only, or some of the only flaws, let's get to that before people get too upset if you hate this movie. I think some of the stuff that doesn't totally work, I think the villain is a pretty weak. Like, he's just a typical whiny, overlooked person who wants to get revenge on all the evildoers in the world for bullying him or for wronging him, not respecting him. It's a pretty weak, lame villain. Like, I don't really care about him, or he's not really that funny. He's not really that creepy. He's just sort of like, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. And then thankfully it's only in one scene, but I'll be the first to say I love Fall Out Boy. I grew up listening to Fall Out Boy and bands like that, and I still listen to them a lot. So I'm a genuinely a big Fall Out Boy fan. But with how iconic, how signature, and how recognizable Fall Out Boy is, especially vocally, they were not the right choice for this reimagining of the Ghostbusters song. I get it. You know, they're a big commercial band. You want to sell this movie, etc. I get that. But in the context of the film, it does not work. It feels way too like this is just Fall Out Boy singing. And that doesn't really work in this. It feels way too modern, like tiresomely modern. It doesn't really work in terms of the rest of the tone of the movie. It feels too slick and poppy, whereas the rest of the movie doesn't really feel that way. And so I'm glad it's only in that one driving sequence where they are going to the rock show or whatever it is. So that is one thing I'll point out. I don't like that. As much as I love the band, not a fan of that song. I mean, maybe otherwise, like outside of the movie, maybe. But even so, there's just something about it that does not mesh for me. And I think that's generally how most people see that song. So besides that, I feel like it's very underappreciated, very misunderstood. And even on a more emotional, dramatic level, I felt like, you know, even in comparison to the others, I feel like I got to know them. I remember them more. I could say more about their personalities and their performances. And even other small little moments like the stuff with Cecily Strong, another SNL member. She's hilarious. And the moment at the end where Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy come back from the portal or whatever it is, and their bleached hair is what it is, and Chris Hemsworth is back to himself as normal, and he keeps on catching food that's being thrown at him, like the bottled water, the sandwich, over and over and over and over again. People are like, where is this coming from? Like, it shows you there are still good comedic directors and good comedic writers that you can use and create good comedy. And Hollywood needs to hire more like Paul Feig. He can do it. Katie Dippold can do it, given the right material. And so I hope that, even though, of course, this movie got sort of middle of the road reviews, I know some people did really like it, but it didn't do very well financially, and it has just been pretty much forgotten, I feel like, especially since they have done these two newer films that connect to the original. That makes it, I guess, more important or more credible, which I think is wrong. So I would recommend, hey, give it a revisit. You never know. If you haven't seen it, give it a try. You never know. So that one is a light 4.5 out of 5.